A single footprint hardens in frozen silt, its edges softened by time, its surface dusted with ash, carried by a wind that no longer blows. Stone presses down on stone. Shadow rests where a body once paused. Nothing moves, yet everything remembers. This mark is not heroic, not monumental. It is quiet, physical, ancient. You could place your hand inside it and feel the cold, where another life once stood, listening to a world that offered no shelter and no promise. You're not here by accident. You did not arrive at this question through curiosity alone. You were carried by an older rhythm, one that moves beneath written history, beneath cities, beneath names. It is the same rhythm that pulled dust across ice fields, that taught hands how to strike stone, that stored memory in muscle, long before it learned to store it in walls. Something in you recognizes that rhythm even now, as if a layer of ash inside your mind has been gently disturbed. What if civilization is not a straight line rising toward complexity, but a slow pulse of appearance and forgetting? What if it does not begin with cities, but with patience, with survival refined into habit, with memory carried from campfire to campfire, generation after generation, until the world itself is ready to receive it? What if the oldest foundations of human life were laid not in abundance, but in scarcity, shaped carefully enough to endure? Before Sumer, before writing, before even the idea of staying humans moved through a landscape that erased its own traces, ice swallowed paths, dust covered stories. Yet beneath that erasure something persisted, a way of seeing, a way of remembering, a quiet intelligence that waited for warmth, for stability, for time to slow just enough to hold shape. Stay with me. Let's drift a little deeper. Night does not arrive suddenly. It accumulates like dust settling after a distant collapse. 20,000 years ago, darkness was substance, not absence, thickened by cold and weighted by ice. Air tasted mineral, sharp, deliberate, every breath acknowledging stone and distance. Exhaled warmth vanished into shadow, immediately reclaimed without ceremony. Silence pressed gently, teaching restraint. The world felt paused, held within a long inhalation that had not decided to release. In this stillness, nothing invited haste and everything demanded attention. Memory stirred quietly, waiting for rhythm, waiting for time to slow enough to leave a mark upon the frozen ground. Ice shaped the planet with patient pressure, thinking slowly through mass and gravity. Continental sheets, kilometers thick, pressed valleys flattened bent crust like softened metal. Rivers rerouted beneath weight coastlines withdrew as oceans locked into frozen memory. Order ruled, severe and quiet, governed by temperature gradients and force. Change occurred only when systems allowed release. Here, gravity felt intimate, sensed in aching joints and sloping horizons. Earth remembered pressure more faithfully than intention, storing decisions as deformation. Time stretched brittle and cold, teaching patience as survival, rather than virtue beneath unyielding skies and unbroken nights of enduring shadowed winter. Sound refused generosity within frozen air, travelling briefly before dissolving. Noise fractured, swallowed by wind or absorbed by snow. Silence layered itself carefully, never empty, always active. Ice cracked at distance with final tones. Wind brushed exposed rock patiently. Snow rearranged grain by grain, movements unseen yet constant. Night became an instrument for listening, training attention where vision failed. Hearing learned temperature scale and threat translating the landscape into cautious understanding. Such listening conserved energy, prevented mistakes, and extended life through disciplined awareness, when darkness ruled schedules, and silence taught restraint nightly across camps, paths, and valleys, beneath ancient stars. Human presence registered briefly, a warm interruption passing through indifferent systems. Bodies leaked heat into air that reclaimed it instantly. Footprints pressed snow and softened by morning. Camps appeared and vanished without trace. Fires burned low, fed by bone fat, and twisted roots never allowed spectacle. Light was negotiation, not declaration. Survival favoured subtlety. Movement aligned with weather animals and terrain minimizing friction, with forces that dwarfed intention. Even breath was paced carefully to avoid exhaustion and reveal nothing unnecessary to night predators or rival groups moving quietly nearby within shared landscapes of risk and temporary refuge for survival alone. Clothing functioned as memory rendered wearable through careful craft. Hide's fur and sinew embodied dust-accumulated trials, each seam a lesson preserved. Materials were chosen for endurance, not comfort. Hands knew which pelts trapped warmth, which stiffened dangerously, which failed when wet. Technology here meant restraint perfected. Objects existed because they endured repeated testing against cold, moisture, and strain. Craft was patience practicing itself across generations. Innovation arrived slowly as subtraction removing excess until only function remained. Beauty followed utility, emerging quietly from balance and survival, without display hierarchy or symbolic excess in this frozen world of disciplined making and care. Above the frozen ground, the sky widened, remarkably cleared by withdrawn seas and locked moisture. Stars sharpened into precise points, returning unchanged nightly. The Milky Way spilled like powdered stone across darkness. Here the sky became architecture stable when Earth was not. Patterns offered orientation and rhythm. Night after night, constellations trained memory, providing reference beyond shifting terrain and seasons. They taught patience, recurrence, and humility before scales exceeding human plans. Sky rhythms anchored journeys, gatherings, and expectations across long winters where ground truth changed, but stars remained reliable guides for memory movement and meaning amid endless cold silence nights. Time slowed into conditions rather than units under this climate. Days blurred, seasons lingered like moods. Winter functioned as baseline reality. Warmth arrived briefly, then withdrew. Impermanent structured life. Accumulation failed because ice erased permanence and wind redistributed effort. Memory stayed mobile, carried by bodies instead of walls. Possession yielded to practice. Planning meant reading signs, not storing surplus. Mobility reduced risk, allowed reset, and preserved equality under scarcity. Where movement ceased, danger concentrated and dependence deepened quickly. Thus, patience governed decisions, aligning action with seasonal breathing of land, ice, and life, through long dark cycles without ownership or hoarding. Stone dominated sensation and instruction throughout this world. Flint rang sharply when struck, carrying in cold air. Limestone remembered warmth briefly after sun. Granite stayed indifferent. Hands learned without language, skin reading texture and temperature. Touch replaced measurement. Pain instructed limits. Erosion was time thinking slowly through matter, teaching consequences patiently and without apology. Mistakes etched themselves into hands and habits never abstracted. Broken tools numbed fingers, lost warmth, recorded lessons. Stone did not forgive, but it educated relentlessly. Knowledge accumulated as caution, not conquest, shaping survival through repetition, observation, and endurance, across generations of cold and waiting alone here. Smell travelled farther than sight in cold clarity. Blood cut metallic through air. Smoke clung to hides and hair embedding identity. Animal scent lingered long after passage mapping invisible corridors. Odour announced presence and absence equally. It warned, reassured, and remembered. In this environment, scent functioned as memory externalized, unavoidable, and precise. Tracking depended upon it, guiding hunts, camps, and avoidance. Smell bypassed thought, entering instinct directly and persistently. Thus, information travelled without speech, teaching vigilance continuously across night's valleys and shifting winds where vision failed and silence dominated as primary survival signal within ancient ecosystems of ice and stone. Night compressed social life inward and close. Bodies gathered to share heat and space. Voices softened, paced by necessity. Stories insulated minds against fear and forgetting. Rhythm mattered. Words were chosen carefully because energy was finite. Memory passed breath to breath, not sacred but required. Community formed through proximity, cooperation, and shared restraint. Conflict resolved quickly for neighbours remained unavoidable. Privacy was scarce, accountability, immediate relationships constantly renegotiated. Such density trained empathy and caution simultaneously. Living together meant enduring together without illusion under shared threats and shared nights, until morning light returned with fragile relief to cold faces and hands. Fire demanded negotiation rather than conquest in frozen darkness. Excess invited danger, scarcity invited death. Flames were shaped, shielded, instructed. Smoke guided sideways. Combustion followed learned rules born of loss. Intelligence expressed alignment, not dominance. Those who listened survived. Attention replaced ambition and patience outperformed force. This ethic extended beyond fire into all decisions and movements. To push recklessly meant injury, hunger, or exposure. Thus wisdom favoured moderation, timing, and respect for forces indifferent to desire. Learning occurred through restraint repeatedly tested across seasons of hardship, until patterns stabilized behavior into reliable survival without formal law or hierarchy, yet effective. This atmosphere delayed civilization not through lack of imagination but capacity. The world could not hold accumulation yet. Ice erased permanence, wind redistributed effort, stone remembered pressure alone. Still precision developed invisibly, observation sharpened. Systems grew complex without monuments. Knowledge lived in bodies, habits, and rhythm. Learning left little trace yet shaped endurance profoundly. What endured was attention calibrated to scarcity. Civilization required stillness long enough to gather surplus. That threshold had not arrived. Preparation occurred anyway, quietly, patiently beneath darkness, ice and time waiting for release that warmth would bring to the land eventually later. Stillness ruled this age, but emptiness did not. Silence carried charge like breath held. Landscapes waited, listening. Humans waited to refining survival until it became culture in motion. Foundations settled unseen. Endurance prepared itself. Nothing announced beginnings. Everything assembled quietly. This was the atmosphere before memory could build walls. The night taught patience first. Through cold shadow dust, ash, stone, and rhythm. The world rehearsed humanity slowly until conditions softened enough to remember what staying might mean together here. This is where our story breathes before movement and waits for dawn quietly beneath ancient night and patient earth alone together. The atmosphere was teacher and boundary simultaneously. It shaped cognition toward pattern recognition and restraint. Humans learned to read systems rather than impose plans. Attention nested within environment. Night rewarded calm. Day punished error. Learning accumulated invisibly stored in movement and choice. These lessons persisted later resurfacing when climates softened. They formed substrata beneath future villages and cities. Memory outlived ice carried forward quietly. When warmth returned, it met prepared minds. Thus, atmosphere influenced destiny long before architecture by shaping patience itself within human survival across deep time and memory alone together. Before Sumer, before walls, and writing, this atmosphere ruled. It asked for listening patience and alignment. In its shadow, humanity learned to endure. The night held us until dawn arrived slowly. Everything that followed rested upon this quiet apprenticeship. Civilization would rise later, but attention formed here. The atmosphere prepared the species. It carved patience into bone and habit. That carving remains. We still breathe its rhythm when nights grow long and silence returns to remind us where endurance began. Deep time listens still patiently within us as memory waits to speak again in cold shadowed quiet of night alone. Evidence does not announce itself loudly in deep time. It accumulates quietly like sediment settling through dark water. Archaeology is not revelation but patience, a discipline trained to notice faint signals buried beneath the noise. Around 20,000 years ago, evidence survives not as monuments, but as fragments, patterns, absences that require care to interpret. Stone tools dulled by repeated use, hearth stains darkening ancient soil, cut marks on bone barely visible beneath mineral crusts. These traces are small, but they persist. They form a grammar of survival written slowly by hands, responding to climate hunger and opportunity rather than ambition. Scientific evidence emerges through multiple disciplines layered together. Paleoclimatology reads ice cores like diaries of atmosphere, measuring trapped gases and isotopes. Archaeobotany examines charred seeds, pollen grains, microscopic residues preserved by accident. Zooarchaeology studies bone assemblages, breakage patterns, age profiles of hunted animals. Lithic analysis tracks how stone was struck, retouched, repaired. Each field alone whispers uncertainty. Together they converge. When independent signals align across regions and methods, confidence grows slowly. Knowledge here is not certainty, but probability strengthened by repetition, correlation and careful refusal to rush conclusions. One of the clearest evidentiary streams comes from stone tools. Lithics preserve behaviour better than bone or wood, which decay easily. At sites dated near 20,000 years ago, tools show standardised forms, repeated techniques and regional preferences. Point scrapers and blades reveal planning depth beyond immediate need. Some were carried long distances, indicating anticipation of future use. Repair marks suggest curation rather than disposal. This implies foresight. Toolkits reflect knowledge transmission across generations, signalling culture, operating before agriculture, before settlement, before visible architecture anchored memory to place. Dating methods anchor evidence within time rather than myth. Radiocarbon analysis measures decay of carbon-14 in organic remains, refined through calibration curves correcting atmospheric variation. Optically stimulated luminescence records the last exposure of sediments to light. Uranium series dating tracks mineral growth in caves. Each method carries uncertainty margins openly acknowledged. Yet when multiple techniques converge, chronological frameworks strengthen. Around 20,000 years ago, independent dates cluster consistently across continents, grounding interpretation in physics rather than speculation. Environmental evidence reconstructs context around human traces. Ice cores reveal temperature swings, dust levels and volcanic events. Pollen analysis maps shifting vegetation belts. Lake sediments record erosion pulses and hydrological change. Together, these proxies reveal harsh, unstable climates during the last glacial maximum. Human occupation patterns align with ecological refugia, where resources persisted. This alignment matters. It demonstrates adaptation, not accident. People selected landscapes strategically responding to constraint with intelligence rather than wandering blindly through chance. Genetic evidence adds another archive. Ancient DNA extracted from bones and teeth reveals population structure migration pulses and bottlenecks. Lineages diverged earlier than once assumed, and gene flow occurred repeatedly across regions. This undermines simplistic replacement models. Continuity and mixture dominate. Humans at 20,000 years ago were not isolated primitives, but connected populations exchanging genes and knowledge. Genetics confirms archaeological hints of movement corridors, and refugia reinforcing networks operating long before farming or cities. Absence itself becomes evidence when understood properly. Gaps in the record reflect preservation bias, erosion, sea level rise, and glacial scouring rather than cultural emptiness. Coastal occupations drowned as oceans rose, river valleys buried beneath sediment, ice erased surfaces clean. Archaeology reads what survives, not all that existed. Recognizing loss prevents false conclusions. Silence requires humility. Absence reminds us that survival left traces unevenly filtered by geology and chemistry, rather than importance or complexity. Patterns repeat across continents. Similar tool forms emerge in distant regions without contact shaped by shared constraints. This convergent behavior demonstrates universality in human adaptation. When cold intensifies, mobility increases. When resources stabilize, camps persist longer. These patterns appear globally around 20,000 years ago. Archaeology becomes comparative reading echoes rather than isolated stories. Repetition replaces coincidence, strengthening inference across space and time. Microscopic evidence deepens reconstruction further. Use-ware analysis examines polish and striations on tools. Residue analysis identifies plant starches, blood proteins and resins. These invisible traces reveal daily activities otherwise lost. Scrapers processed hides, blades cut plants, points struck animals. Such detail reveals routine teaching and specialization without hierarchy. Civilization is not required for complexity. Complexity emerges wherever survival demands coordination. Fire evidence offers critical behavioral insight. Hearth placement, ash composition, and charcoal species reveal fuel selection and management. Controlled fire implies scheduling, cooperation, and planning. Rebuilt hearths suggest repeated seasonal occupation and temporal awareness. Fire-altered diet, tool-making, and social structure. Its consistent presence before agriculture reshapes narratives of cognitive development. Fire management reflects communication restraint and collective memory long before permanent settlement. Spatial evidence reveals organization beyond chance. Artifact clustering shows activity zones. Hearths align with sleeping areas. Tool production occurs away from refuse. Even temporary camps show internal logic. This contradicts stereotypes of randomness. Archaeology reads space as behavior fossilized. Organization emerges without architecture. These spatial habits later scale into villages and cities rooted here in subtle distributions of stone, ash, bone, and movement paths. Evidence resists dramatic conclusions. It favors accumulation over revelation. Archaeological reasoning proceeds slowly correcting itself. Hypotheses remain provisional. This humility is strength. Around 20,000 years ago, evidence does not show civilization but capability. Humans were prepared for complexity once conditions allowed. Civilization emerges from long preparation, not sudden invention. History becomes process rather than event. Scientific debate refines evidence continuously. New methods recalibrate timelines. Improved sampling reduces bias. This dynamism strengthens archaeology rather than weakening it. Despite refinement, patterns remain stable. Sophisticated behavior predates farming. Conclusions do not depend on single discoveries but on networks of data. When challenged, interpretations adjust rather than collapse. This resilience defines deep time knowledge. Taken together, evidence forms a dense mosaic. Independent lines support each other. Tools align with climate. Genetics aligns with migration. Fire aligns with planning. Space aligns with social norms. Convergence reduces uncertainty. Archaeology thrives on agreement across weak signals. Around 20,000 years ago, that agreement points to capable, adaptive humans. Not yet civilized but prepared. Before Sumer, before cities, data already speaks. It speaks softly, statistically, cautiously. Its message persists. Humans were thinking, planning, adapting long before monuments. Civilization did not appear from nothing. It emerged when conditions allowed accumulation. Evidence reveals preparation, not absence. With this foundation, deep time becomes legible, and the story can move forward anchored in trace rather than myth. An anomaly is not a mystery in the dramatic sense. It is quieter than that. It appears as a small refusal inside an otherwise stable pattern, a data point that does not settle where it should. In deep time, anomalies are easy to dismiss because they are inconvenient. They slow narratives, complicate timelines, and resist clean explanation. Yet it is precisely here in these moments of resistance that the record becomes most honest. The anomaly is where the Earth hesitates, and where our assumptions are tested against material reality. Archaeology expects a certain rhythm. Climate shifts, populations respond. Technologies appear, gradually then intensify. Mobility decreases, storage increases, and eventually settlement follows. This sequence feels intuitive, almost natural. But scattered throughout the record near and before 20,000 years ago are traces that do not conform to this rhythm. They are not spectacular enough to overturn everything, yet persistent enough to trouble certainty. They appear as skills arriving early, as behaviors out of expected order, as sophistication embedded within contexts of scarcity. Consider the tools that seem too refined for their time. Blades struck with remarkable consistency. Composite implements implying planning beyond immediate survival. Heat-treated stone altered deliberately to improve fracture properties appearing earlier than expected in some regions. These are not isolated mistakes in dating, but recurring signals. They suggest knowledge that should, according to linear models, belong to a later stage. The anomaly does not shout, it repeats. There are sites where occupation intensity appears unexpectedly high, despite harsh conditions. Layers show repeated returns to the same locations, even when mobility would seem safer. Hearths rebuilt activity zones, reuse tool types recurring with minimal variation. This persistence implies attachment memory and place-based knowledge operating earlier than anticipated. It does not look like permanent settlement, but it does not look fully transient either. It occupies an uncomfortable middle ground. In some regions, symbolic behavior appears where none is expected. Pigments transported long distances, objects shaped beyond strict utility, burials arranged with care disproportionate to survival necessity. These acts require energy investment with no immediate return. Under models that assume constant scarcity suppresses symbolism, such behaviors appear anomalous. Yet they are there quietly embedded in layers of ash and sediment, asking to be acknowledged without exaggeration. The anomaly also emerges in spatial organization. Certain camps display internal order, too consistent to be accidental. Activity areas maintained across visits. Tool production separated from consumption. Refuse managed rather than scattered. These patterns imply shared norms and expectations. They suggest that social rules existed even without permanence. Organization does not wait for walls, it precedes them. Genetic data contributes its own anomalies. Population continuity in regions assumed to be abandoned. Gene flow across supposed barriers during peak glacial conditions. These signals challenge simplified maps of refuge and isolation. They suggest movement where models predict stasis connection, where separation was assumed. The anomaly here is not movement itself, but persistence of contact under pressure. Even climate records offer their own resistance. Local environments sometimes diverge from global averages. Microclimates create pockets of stability within broader instability. Humans appear to have exploited these pockets with precision. The anomaly is not that climate was harsh, but that it was uneven. This unevenness allowed strategies that do not fit broad generalizations. Human adaptation followed nuance rather than averages. Anomalies accumulate slowly. No single one overturns a framework, but together they strain it. They force questions to surface. Were our stages too rigid? Were our timelines too tidy? Did we underestimate the capacity of mobile societies to carry complex systems without material accumulation? The anomaly presses gently but persistently against certainty. Importantly, anomaly does not imply lost civilizations or hidden empires. It does not require catastrophe or erasure. It simply suggests that human capability did not wait for agriculture to mature. Complexity is not the exclusive property of surplus. It can exist within movement, within scarcity, within repetition, refined across generations. The anomaly invites humility rather than speculation. In deep time, preparation often precedes opportunity by millennia. Skills develop long before conditions allow them to scale. Knowledge accumulates without expression in stone. When environments shift, that knowledge appears suddenly, giving the illusion of abrupt change. The anomaly reminds us that suddenness is often an artifact of preservation, not reality. Archaeology struggles with anomalies because they resist categorization. They sit between definitions, not primitive, not civilized, not fully mobile, not settled. They inhabit transitional spaces that frameworks prefer to compress or ignore. Yet these spaces are where most human life unfolded. The anomaly is not an exception. It is a reminder of continuity. When we slow down enough to sit with these irregularities, a different picture emerges. Human history begins to look less like a staircase and more like a braided river. Channels diverge and rejoin. Some deepen temporarily. Others disappear beneath sediment only to resurface later. Progress is not abandoned but redefined as adaptive complexity rather than linear ascent. The anomaly also reveals the limits of our questions. When we ask only when civilization began, we risk overlooking how long humans practiced being ready. The anomaly suggests that readiness is older than outcome, that competence preceded expression, that patience accumulated quietly while the world was still too unstable to hold it. In this sense, anomalies are gifts. They protect the past from simplification. They prevent us from mistaking absence of evidence for absence of ability. They force archaeology to remain cautious, flexible, and self-correcting. Without anomalies, narratives harden too quickly. As we move forward in deep time, these irregularities will matter more, not less. They will explain why change appears sudden later. They will clarify why agriculture settlement and hierarchy seem to arrive fully formed. They did not emerge from nothing. They rose from long preparation invisible to earlier frameworks. The anomaly is where the story bends but does not break. It is where certainty loosens its grip. It asks us to listen more carefully, to accept unevenness, and to allow the past to remain complex. In deep time, truth rarely announces itself cleanly. It accumulates where patterns fail, waiting for patience to notice. From here, the narrative does not collapse. It deepens. The anomaly does not disrupt the story of civilization. It thickens it, slowing us down just enough to see how much had already formed before anything permanent was allowed to stand. Silence in deep time is not emptiness, but absence with weight. It is the space where evidence should be, but is not. Archaeology encounters silence as missing layers, eroded surfaces, submerged landscapes, and vanished materials. These gaps are not failures of inquiry, but features of reality itself. Time removes more than it preserves. Wood rots, fibers decay, coastlines drown, ice scours. What survives does so unevenly. Silence then is not neutral. It shapes interpretation. It tempts certainty where caution is required. To study early humanity honestly, one must learn to read what is not there without inventing what never was. Much of human history unfolded in places least likely to survive. Coasts offered abundance, yet rising seas erased them. Riverbanks supported life, yet sediment buried them. Forest camps left traces too delicate for stone to remember. Silence grows where preservation fails, not where humans failed to live. This distinction matters. Absence in the record has often been mistaken for absence of behaviour. The deeper the time, the louder this mistake becomes. Archaeology must therefore discipline imagination, allowing silence to remain silence, while still acknowledging that entire worlds of activity may have vanished without trace. Silence also emerges through bias. Early research focused on caves and durable stone landscapes because they survived and were visible. Open-air sites eroded away. Coastal plains drowned. What we know reflects where we looked first. This bias shaped theories of progress, mobility, and capability. When evidence clusters artificially, narratives follow. Silence hides alternatives. Only recently have submerged archaeology and refined survey methods begun to correct this imbalance. As silence recedes slightly, complexity appears earlier than expected. Yet much remains lost. The record will never be complete. Archaeology operates within partial truth by necessity. There are long stretches where no sites appear at all. Thousands of years pass between dated occupations. This silence does not indicate abandonment of the planet. It indicates erasure. Glacial advance scraped surfaces clean, wind-deflated sediments, water redistributed material beyond recognition. These processes obey physics, not culture. Silence therefore records geological action more than human absence. Interpreting it requires collaboration between archaeology and earth science. Stratigraphy, geomorphology, and sedimentology become translators of loss. They explain why continuity appears broken when life itself was likely continuous beneath destructive forces indifferent to memory or meaning. Silence also exists within sites. Activities leave unequal traces. Hunting leaves bones. Plant gathering often does not. Tool use survives better than social interaction. Teaching ritual language and belief vanish almost completely. What remains privileges certain behaviours while muting others. This creates distorted portraits. Early humans appear obsessed with stone because stone survives. Their emotional, symbolic and social lives fall quiet. Silence thus shapes perception, encouraging underestimation of cognition. Recognizing this bias is essential. Archaeology must resist equating visibility with importance. The loudest traitors are not always the most meaningful ones in lived human experience. Silence tempts speculation. Where data fades, imagination rushes in. Lost civilizations, forgotten empires vanish, technologies fill the gap. Yet silence does not justify invention. Responsible interpretation requires restraint. Absence can support multiple explanations, not one. Archaeology values limits. It accepts uncertainty as part of truth. Silence demands patience rather than resolution. It reminds us that knowledge grows unevenly. Filling gaps too eagerly creates myths that harden into belief. The discipline survives by resisting this urge. Silence must remain a boundary marking, where evidence ends and humility begins within the study of deep human pasts. There is also silence imposed by scale. Individual lives disappear into averages. Radiocarbon dates compress decades into single numbers. Generations blur into ranges. The texture of daily life dissolves. Archaeology speaks in probabilities, not biographies. This abstraction is necessary but costly. Silence replaces voices. We know patterns, not names. We see behaviour, not emotion. This silence can feel cold, but it protects against projection. It prevents modern assumptions from colonising ancient minds. By accepting this distance, archaeology preserves integrity, allowing past lives to remain other rather than familiar through forced narrative. Language leaves almost no trace before writing. This is one of the deepest silences. Speech shaped cooperation, teaching, planning, and memory, yet vanished instantly. Archaeology infers language indirectly through complexity of behaviour. Coordinated hunting implies communication. Tool standardization implies instruction. Social organization implies shared symbols. Yet words themselves are gone. This absence resists reconstruction. Attempts to imagine proto-languages exceed evidence. Silence remains. It reminds us that some of the most powerful human technologies are immaterial. They do not fossilize. They disappear completely, leaving only their effects etched faintly into stone and bone distributions across ancient landscapes. Ritual occupies a similar silence. Some burials suggest care, some objects suggest symbolism, but meaning itself dissolves. A pigment may mark status, identity, or practicality. A burial position may reflect belief, convenience, or chance. Without texts, intention remains uncertain. Archaeology must hold multiple interpretations simultaneously. Silence here protects plurality. It prevents closure. Ritual meaning cannot be recovered fully, only approximated. This uncertainty is not weakness. It is honesty. It acknowledges that ancient minds operated within symbolic worlds inaccessible to us. Silence preserves that distance, preventing modern belief systems from being projected backward without constraint. Silence also governs chronology. Dating methods provide ranges, not moments. Events stretch, beginnings blur, endings fade. There is rarely a clear first occurrence. Innovations appear gradually, intermittently, unevenly. Silence fills the spaces between appearances. This challenges narratives of sudden change. Agriculture settlement hierarchies seem abrupt only because silence hides their preparation. Long periods of experimentation leave little trace. When conditions finally stabilize, visibility increases, creating illusion of emergence. Silence thus distorts perception of speed. Understanding this protects against false revolutions. History becomes slow-layered and patient rather than dramatic and abrupt. The emotional response to silence matters. Humans dislike gaps. We seek continuity explanation story. Silence frustrates this impulse. Yet in deep time, research frustration is instructive. It teaches respect for limits. It trains scholars to distinguish between what is known, what is likely, and what is unknowable. Silence becomes a discipline rather than obstacle. It shapes ethical interpretation. Claims shrink. Confidence becomes proportional to evidence. This restraint builds credibility. It allows archaeology to remain grounded even as new discoveries shift frameworks. Silence properly respected stabilizes knowledge rather than undermining it. Silence is not evenly distributed. It clusters around marginalized environments and populations. Nomadic groups leave fewer traces than sedentary ones. Perishable technologies vanish faster than durable ones. This skews narratives toward what lasts rather than what mattered. Recognizing this bias allows correction. Methods evolve to recover microtraces, residues, and indirect indicators. Still, much remains unrecoverable. Silence persists as a reminder that history is selective by physics. It preserves inequality of memory. Archaeology must therefore remain cautious when drawing conclusions about importance dominance or advancement from visibility alone within deep prehistoric records. There is also silence created by catastrophe. Floods, eruptions, impacts, and abrupt climate shifts erase landscapes entirely. Human response to these events often disappears with them. Survival strategies leave little trace when destruction is total, yet catastrophe shaped human trajectories profoundly. Silence hides these inflection points. Only indirect signals remain: abrupt sediment layers, ash horizons, sudden genetic bottlenecks. Interpreting these requires inference without narrative detail. Silence forces synthesis across disciplines. It reminds us that some of the most transformative moments left the fewest stories behind, swallowed by processes larger than memory could retain. Silence does not mean nothing happened. It means what happened did not fossilize. This distinction reframes humility as necessity. Archaeology is not incomplete because it lacks answers, but because time destroys evidence asymmetrically. Accepting this changes how we ask questions. Instead of asking for origins, we ask for conditions. Instead of seeking firsts, we examine thresholds. Silence becomes contextual rather than obstructive. It redirects inquiry toward processes that can be observed indirectly. This shift deepens understanding. It allows past complexity to exist without requiring proof of every detail. Silence thus becomes collaborator rather than enemy in reconstructing deep time. As the record quiets, interpretation must slow. Silence demands pacing. It resists urgency. It asks us to wait. In this waiting, patterns emerge more clearly. Noise recedes. Overinterpretation weakens. Archaeology becomes listening rather than declaring. This mode aligns with deep time itself. The earth does not speak quickly. It releases information gradually. Silence marks where patience is required. Those who rush miss structure. Those who linger see relationships. Silence teaches method. It shapes the tempo of inquiry, ensuring that knowledge grows at a pace compatible with the evidence that survives to support it responsibly. Chapter 4 rests within this quiet. Silence is not an enemy to be conquered, but a condition to be understood. It frames every claim, tempers every conclusion, and protects the past from simplification. Before civilization, before writing, before permanence, most of human life unfolded in silence. That silence still surrounds the record. Listening to it carefully allows deeper truth to surface. The story does not end where evidence stops. It pauses. And in that pause, archaeology learns restraint, humility, and respect for a past that will never speak fully, yet still shapes everything that followed through absence as much as presence. The world we are about to enter does not announce itself with monuments or names. It does not rise in stone or linger in writing. It exists instead as a thickness in time, a pressure between layers, a long interval where humans lived, adapted, imagined, and forgot, leaving behind only faint textures in earth and bone. This is the forgotten epoch not because nothing happened, but because what happened did not survive the brutal filtering of time. Most of human experience is like this, lived fully, then erased quietly. Between 20,000 and 10,000 years ago, the planet was not waiting for civilization. It was breathing, expanding, and contracting under ice, reshaping coastlines, rivers, and ecosystems with no regard for memory. Vast areas now submerged beneath oceans were once dry land walked by people whose footprints dissolved long before they could harden into traceable history. Sea levels rose slowly, then suddenly swallowing camps, pathways, and entire lifeways without drama. The ocean is the greatest archive destroyer humanity has ever known. In this drowned world, humans were not primitive but precise. Their knowledge was intimate, embodied, and situational. They knew when ice would fracture, where herds would cross, how wind carried scent across snow or dry grass. This intelligence did not accumulate in structures or texts. It lived in bodies, gestures, and seasonal rhythms. When a generation died, much of that knowledge died with them unless carefully passed on. Complexity existed, but it was fragile. Archaeology struggles here not because humans were absent, but because permanence was unnecessary. Camps were light tools, portable shelters temporary by design. Fire was used sparingly, stone recycled, endlessly bone and wood returned to soil. What remains are fragments that resist narrative. A blade here, a hearth stain there, a scatter of flakes that once marked a moment of care or urgency. These are not the ruins of failure. They are the traces of efficiency. The forgotten epoch reminds us that civilization is not the default state of humanity. For tens of thousands of years, humans thrived without cities, borders, or stored surplus. They were social, symbolic, cooperative, and creative, yet unbound by architecture. Art existed as motion, as voice, as mark on skin or object that decayed. Beauty was not meant to last. It was meant to be felt, then released. Climate during this time was unstable, not catastrophic, but restless. The ice did not retreat in a straight line. It pulsed, paused, surged again. Each shift forced adaptation. Valleys that once fed groups closed. New corridors opened briefly, then vanished. Human populations expanded and contracted like breath. Genetic evidence suggests bottlenecks, followed by dispersal's repeated cycles of loss and renewal that shaped who survived to pass on traits, stories, and ways of thinking. This is where the idea of a forgotten world becomes uncomfortable. It challenges the assumption that progress is inevitable. Entire cultural strategies may have existed, flourished, and disappeared without leaving a name. Ways of organizing life that worked beautifully for millennia may have vanished because the climate tilted a few degrees or a shoreline moved or a migration path broke. Civilization selects for memory. Survival does not. The land itself remembers differently. Sediment layers compress time into colour and grain. Pollen trapped in mud reveals forests that no longer exist. Isotopes in ice record temperatures felt by people who never imagined measurement. These natural archives tell us that humans were present, persistent, responsive. What they do not tell us is how those humans understood their world. Meaning does not fossilize easily. In this epoch, language itself may have been more fluid. Words tied to places lost relevance when places disappeared. Myth was not anchored to monuments, but to movement. Stories travelled with people adapting as landscapes changed. A mountain god drowned. A river spirit vanished. New meanings replaced old ones without ceremony. Memory was dynamic, not preservational. What archaeology sometimes misreads as absence is often deliberate lightness. To survive instability, humans minimized attachment. Possessions were few. Homes were not meant to last beyond a season. The idea of inheritance was weak because the future was uncertain. When the world might change completely within a lifetime, accumulation becomes risk. Mobility becomes security. Yet even here there are hints of continuity. Tool styles persist across regions. Symbolic motifs repeat in distant places. Certain burial practices appear again and again, suggesting shared ideas about death and belonging. These are the threads that survived the forgetting, thin but resilient. They suggest that beneath the flux, humans carried internal structures that weathered collapse better than stone ever could. The forgotten epoch also reframes intelligence. These humans did not lack foresight. They practiced a different kind of it. Instead of planning for decades ahead, they planned for flexibility. Instead of building walls, they built relationships. Social networks functioned as insurance systems. Knowledge was distributed, not centralized. Authority was situational, emerging when needed, dissolving when conditions changed. From this perspective, later, civilization appears not as an inevitable rise, but as a narrowing. When stability finally returned, humans committed to place storage and permanence. This choice amplified memory but reduced adaptability. The forgotten epoch represents a broader range of human possibility, much of which was abandoned when the world grew predictable enough to settle. There is a quiet humility in acknowledging this. The past we celebrate is not the past that sustained humanity the longest. Cities' writing and monuments occupy a thin slice of our story. The deeper time beneath them is vast, quiet, and largely erased. Not because it failed, but because it did not need to announce itself. As night deepens, this realization softens rather than disturbs. The forgotten epoch is not lost. It lives in the ways humans still respond to uncertainty and instincts that surface during crisis, in the ease with which people adapt when structures fall away. It is present in the body's memory, older than culture, older than history. To drift through this time is to accept that meaning does not require permanence, that life can be full, intelligent, and humane without leaving monuments behind, that forgetting is not always loss. Sometimes it is simply the earth exhaling, making room for what comes next. The reset is not an ending. It never has been. In geological time, destruction is rarely a full stop. It is a breath taken by the planet, an exhale after pressure builds too long. Ice melts, seas rise, forests burn, ash settles, and life adjusts its posture accordingly. For humans, living deep in prehistory resets were not metaphors. They were lived events felt through cold hunger, silence, and sudden abundance. Around the end of the last glacial maximum, the world began to loosen its grip. Ice sheets thinned not uniformly but in pulses. Meltwater surged into rivers that had been frozen for generations. Coastlines crept inward, swallowing plains once crossed casually on foot. This was not a single catastrophe, but a series of adjustments unfolding across centuries. Each adjustment erased something and revealed something else. For mobile human groups, the reset meant disorientation before opportunity. Familiar hunting grounds vanished. Migration routes dissolved beneath water. Seasonal signals arrived earlier or later than memory predicted. Elders whose authority rested on experience found that experience less reliable. This is what makes resets dangerous. They invalidate wisdom without warning, yet within this destabilization new patterns emerged. Areas once locked beneath ice became corridors. Valleys filled with meltwater turned into fertile basins. Species that had retreated south returned northward in waves. Humans followed, cautiously testing these reshaped landscapes with the same patience they had always relied on. The reset did not demand reinvention. It demanded attention. Archaeological layers from this period show disruption but not collapse. Toolkits diversify rather than simplify. Diets broaden. Evidence of plant processing increases alongside continued hunting. This is not desperation. It is experimentation. When old systems fail, flexibility becomes the most valuable trait a species can possess. The reset also altered the relationship between time and place. In the glacial world, time was cyclical but unforgiving. Seasons repeated, yet offered little margin for error. In the warming world, predictability returned unevenly. Some places stabilized faster than others. Humans noticed. They lingered where the land responded generously. They returned to the same sites more often. Memory began to anchor itself geographically. This is where the reset becomes misunderstood. It is often framed as a trigger for progress, as if warming automatically produced civilization. But the archaeological record shows restraint. Humans did not rush to settle. They tested stability repeatedly before trusting it. Camps became seasonal hubs rather than permanent homes. Investment increased slowly, cautiously, as if waiting for the earth to prove it would not change its mind again. Resets also reset social dynamics. During scarcity, groups fragment. During abundance, they aggregate. The warming world allowed larger gatherings without immediate risk. Sites from this period show evidence of periodic congregation. Shared meals, exchanged materials, and overlapping traditions suggest that humans used these moments to renegotiate alliances, exchange knowledge, and recalibrate identity. This social recalibration matters. A reset is not only environmental, it is cognitive. When the world changes, humans change how they think about risk, reward, and future. In a more stable environment, long-term planning becomes possible. But it does not appear instantly. It creeps in through small decisions like leaving tools behind with the expectation of return or revisiting the same shoreline year after year. The reset also reshaped human perception of abundance. In the glacial world, abundance was fleeting and suspect. In the post-glacial world, it appeared more reliable but not yet controllable. Humans began to notice that certain plants responded positively to disturbance. That cleared ground produced more growth. that discarded seeds sprouted near camps. These observations did not create agriculture immediately. They planted curiosity. Curiosity is the true engine of the reset, not comfort, not safety. The warming world did not make humans relax. It gave them space to ask questions their ancestors could not afford to ask. What happens if we stay longer? What returns if we come back? What grows if we intervene slightly? These questions unfold slowly in the record written in grinding stones, storage pits and altered landscapes. Importantly, the reset did not erase earlier knowledge. It layered over it. Skills honed in scarcity remained useful. Mobility did not vanish. It became strategic rather than compulsory. People learned to balance movement with return flexibility with familiarity. This balance defines the transitional period far better than any single invention. The Earth itself was still unstable. Meltwater pulses caused rapid sea level rise events that drowned entire coastal worlds in decades. For those living through it, this must have felt like betrayal. Places trusted for generations disappeared within a lifetime. Such losses reinforce caution. They remind humans that permanence is provisional. This tension between opportunity and uncertainty defines the reset. It is not a clean turning point. It is a long negotiation. Humans learn to trust the land conditionally, to invest without committing fully, to imagine futures while keeping exits open. This mindset shaped everything that followed. In deep time, resets are common. What makes this one significant is not that it happened, but that humans survived it, with enough continuity to build upon it later. Many species did not. Megafauna vanished. Ecosystems restructured. Humans adapted not by dominating, but by remaining observant. The reset also filtered cultures. Strategies that depended on extreme specialization disappeared. Generalist approaches thrived. Knowledge that could travel survived. Knowledge tied to a single place did not. This selective pressure shaped the psychological foundations of later societies more than any single climatic event. As warmth stabilized further, the groundwork laid during the reset became visible. Seasonal camps became persistent locales. Return became routine. Memory accumulated. But none of this was inevitable. It was contingent, fragile, and reversible. At any moment, another climatic snap could have undone it all. This awareness lingers beneath the surface of early human behavior. It explains why early settlements were cautious, why storage was modest at first, why mobility was never fully abandoned. The reset taught humility. It taught humans that the earth sets the terms, not ambition. In the quiet of night, the reset feels less like disaster and more like rhythm. The planet inhales and exhales. Life contracts and expands. Humans small within this cycle learn to move with it rather than against it. Civilization, when it eventually appears, carries the memory of this lesson in its bones. To understand the reset is to abandon the idea of progress as a straight ascent. It is to see history as a series of adjustments, each one preserving some possibilities and discarding others. The reset did not create civilization. It cleared the conditions under which civilization could eventually be attempted, and even then the Earth retained the power to undo it. The echo is not a repetition of events, but a repetition of tendencies. It is the way the past continues to vibrate inside the present long after its original form has dissolved. In deep time, nothing truly disappears. It thins, stretches, and reappears in altered states. Human civilization did not emerge from silence. It emerged from resonance, from habits, instincts, and patterns shaped thousands of years before anyone imagined cities. Long before permanent structures rose, humans learned how to remember without writing. Memory lived in the body. It lived in walking routes repeated across generations and hand movements, learned by watching elders in seasonal expectations that aligned with stars, ice, and animal behavior. These memories did not fossilize, but they endured. When conditions changed, they resurfaced, guiding choices that felt intuitive rather than deliberate. The echo appears first in movement. Even after settlement begins, humans continue to organize space as if they might leave. Early villages show paths aligned with older migration routes. Doorways face prevailing winds known for millennia. Storage areas cluster where temporary camps once stood. The ground remembers how people used it, and people unconsciously follow those traces long after the original reasons are forgotten. Architecture itself carries echoes. Circular dwellings appear again and again across early human history, not because circles are symbolic, but because they distribute heat, resist collapse, and encourage gathering. These forms predate agriculture. They emerge in mobile camps, reappear in semi-sedentary sites, and persist into early villages. Stone remembers what bodies learned first. The echo is audible in social organization. Hunter-gatherer societies rely on trust, reciprocity, and shared obligation. These principles do not vanish with settlement. They become embedded in ritual feasting and communal labor. Even as hierarchy begins to form, early societies struggle against it, preserving mechanisms that redistribute wealth and reinforce cohesion. These tensions echo older survival strategies shaped by uncertainty. Language itself is an echo chamber. Words tied to landforms, animals, and seasons persist even when environments change. Agricultural societies continue to speak in metaphors of hunting, tracking, and gathering. Power is described as possession. Knowledge is described as inheritance. These linguistic remnants reveal how deeply earlier lifeways structured cognition. The body holds echoes most faithfully. Skeletal markers show movements repeated across generations. Knees adapted for long-distance walking, shoulders shaped by carrying loads suspended from poles, hands bearing wear patterns consistent with tool use long after those tools changed form. Civilization alters labor, but it does not erase embodied memory. The echo also lives in fear. Early humans learned to read subtle environmental warnings, shifts in animal behavior, changes in wind or water. These sensitivities persist. Even in modern societies, people respond viscerally to environmental instability. Anxiety rises with drought, flood, or fire, even when technology promises control. The nervous system remembers vulnerability. Ritual preserves echoes intentionally. Seasonal festivals align with ancient cycles. Burial practices retain spatial symbolism rooted in older beliefs about land and ancestry. Even when meaning shift forms persist. A fire lit at the center, a body oriented towards sunrise. These gestures are older than theology. They are memory made physical. The echo is also visible in tools. Grinding stones appear wherever humans intensify plant use regardless of culture. The motion is the same. The posture is the same. The rhythm is inherited. Tool shapes change, but the gestures that animate them remain constant. Technology evolves, but the human interface does not. Trade networks amplify echoes across distance. When objects travel, so do ideas. Obsidian blades carry not only function, but technique. Beads carry identity. Pigments carry symbolism. These materials spread patterns of thought as much as goods. Over time, distant communities begin to resemble each other in subtle ways, not through conquest, but through resonance. Even settlement layout reflects ancient instincts. Early cities cluster around water sources just as camps once did. Central spaces mirror old gathering grounds. Peripheral zones echo refuse areas from mobile camps. Urban planning often unknowingly reenacts prehistoric spatial logic, because it aligns with human comfort and efficiency shaped long before cities existed. The echo challenges the idea that civilization represents a clean break. It suggests continuity beneath transformation. The tools of memory changed, but the content did not vanish. Writing externalized memory, but the instincts governing what mattered were already present. What changed was scale, not essence. This continuity explains why civilization sometimes feels unstable. Systems built rapidly atop ancient foundations inherit tensions they did not design. Hierarchy presses against egalitarian instincts. Permanence conflicts with adaptability. Accumulation strains sharing norms. These frictions are echoes of earlier worlds negotiating new constraints. The echo also explains resilience. When structures fail, humans revert quickly to older patterns. Communities self-organize. Barter replaces currency. Shared labor returns. These responses feel natural because they are ancient. Crisis peels away complexity and exposes underlying memory. In genetics, echoes appear as well. Certain traits linked to endurance, adaptability, and stress response persist across populations shaped by ancient climates. Selection pressures from the glacial world still influence how bodies process scarcity, effort, and uncertainty. Biology carries memory deeper than culture. The echo's not nostalgic. It does not idealize the past. It simply persists. It reminds us that human behavior is layered, not replaced. Each new system sits atop older ones, drawing strength and tension from what lies beneath. Civilization did not overwrite humanity. It compressed it. As night deepens, the echo becomes easier to hear. Modern silence reveals ancient rhythms. The body relaxes into patterns older than architecture. Breathing slows. Attention widens. In these moments, the distance between past and present thins. The echo is not behind us. It is within us. Understanding the echo changes how we read history. It shifts focus from origins to continuities, from inventions to inheritances. Civilization becomes not a miracle, but an amplification of long-practiced behaviors, finally given space to persist materially. The echo prepares us for what comes next. Patterns repeat because conditions repeat. The Earth shifts again. Systems strain. Old instincts surface. What endured once may endure again, not because history repeats, but because memory does. In deep time, the past never stops speaking. It simply lowers its voice, waiting for stillness to make it audible again. History does not move forward. It circles, not in perfect loops, but in widening spirals that revisit familiar terrain under altered conditions. What we mistake for progress is often repetition wearing new materials. In deep time, patterns matter more than events. They persist quietly, indifferent to names, borders, or beliefs. The archaeological record reveals this truth slowly, like a coastline emerging as fog lifts. Settlement, abandonment, return. Storage, surplus, inequality. Collapse, dispersal, reorganization. These sequences recur across millennia, separated by geography yet aligned in structure. Different actors, different climates, same underlying rhythm. Humans do not invent new behaviors as often as they rediscover old ones. When conditions allow familiar solutions resurface. When conditions tighten, flexibility returns. The pattern is not moral, it does not reward or punish, it responds. Civilization grows when stability holds long enough. It fractures when stability withdraws. This circularity begins long before cities. Even mobile societies follow patterns. Seasonal movement traces loops across landscapes. Camps reappear in the same places year after year. Memory becomes spatial before it becomes symbolic. The land teaches repetition, and repetition teaches trust. As environments stabilize, repetition deepens. Temporary returns become expectations. Expectations become commitments. Commitments accumulate material traces. Floors thicken, walls rise, storage grows. Each layer reinforces the assumption that tomorrow will resemble yesterday closely enough to justify investment. This is where the pattern tightens. Sedentism increases efficiency, but it also increases vulnerability. Fixed infrastructure magnifies risk. When failure occurs, it is no longer absorbed through movement. It concentrates. This concentration sets the stage for inequality, hierarchy, and eventual stress. The same sequence appears again and again. Surplus enables specialization. Specialization enables scale. Scale demands coordination. Coordination produces authority. Authority accumulates power. Power invites imbalance. Imbalance destabilizes systems. Systems reset. The circle closes only to begin again under new parameters. Importantly, the pattern is not deterministic. It does not force outcomes. It creates tendencies. Societies navigate within these constraints differently, but the constraints themselves persist. Humans can delay collapse, soften inequality, redistribute risk. They cannot eliminate the trade-offs inherent in scale. Archaeology reveals moments when societies attempt to escape the pattern. Egalitarian experiments emerge within settled contexts. Ritual redistribution intensifies. Communal architecture expands. These are not naive choices. They are conscious efforts to counteract accumulation. Sometimes they succeed temporarily. But over generations, gravity asserts itself. Resources settle unevenly. Advantage compounds. Memory attaches to lineage. Structures inherit imbalance. The pattern resumes not because humans fail, but because stability allows difference to accumulate. The illusion of linear progress arises because each cycle leaves a residue. Technologies persist. Knowledge accumulates. Later societies inherit tools earlier ones did not possess. This creates the appearance of ascent, but structurally the same negotiations repeat: how to share surplus, how to manage risk, how to balance individual gain with collective survival. The pattern extends beyond economics. It shapes belief. Periods of uncertainty produce animistic or relational worldviews, emphasizing balance and reciprocity. Periods of stability produce hierarchical cosmologies, reflecting social order. Gods mirror governance. Cosmology echoes infrastructure. When societies fracture belief fragments too, pluralism returns. Local traditions reassert themselves. The sacred becomes portable again. These shifts are not random. They follow material conditions closely even when expressed symbolically. The pattern also governs memory. In stable systems, history is formalized. Writing emerges. Records accumulate. The past becomes codified. In unstable systems, memory reverts to oral forms. Story adapts. Flexibility replaces precision. Each mode suits its environment. Climate acts as the metronome. Subtle shifts alter agricultural yields, water access, and migration pressure. Small changes ripple outward through social systems. Archaeology shows that many so-called collapses coincide with climatic variability rather than singular disasters. The pattern tightens as margins shrink. What makes the pattern difficult to accept is its indifference to intention. Societies do not collapse because they are immoral or ignorant. They collapse because conditions change faster than structures can adapt. Adaptation always lags environment. The same pattern is visible in modern systems. Complexity accelerates, specialization deepens, interdependence grows, risk concentrates, resilience decreases. These dynamics are not unique. They are ancient, scaled upward. Deep time teaches humility. It reveals that humans are brilliant pattern followers but poor pattern breakers. We respond effectively within cycles but struggle to step outside them. This does not mean change is impossible. It means it is constrained. Understanding the pattern reframes history. Instead of asking why civilizations fail, we ask how long they negotiate balance before stress overwhelms adaptation. Instead of seeking origins, we observe recurrences. The question becomes not how civilization began, but how many times it has tried. The archaeological records suggest many attempts. Some left cities, others left only soil anomalies, altered pollen signatures, disturbed sediments. Absence of monuments does not imply absence of complexity. It often implies impermanence. This is where modern bias misleads us. We privilege durability, we equate stone with success. But deep time favours adaptability. Societies that left little behind may have endured longer precisely because they resisted scale. The pattern does not favour permanence, it favours response. When humans align with environmental rhythms, systems stabilise. When systems impose rigid expectations on fluid conditions, stress accumulates. The Earth does not negotiate. It adjusts. Recognizing the pattern does not induce despair. It induces clarity. It strips history of myth while preserving meaning. It shows that humanity is not marching toward destiny, but oscillating within constraints older than culture. At night, when the world quiets, the pattern becomes perceptible. Breath mirrors tide, thought mirrors season. The body remembers cycles even when the mind resists them. Sleep itself is a daily rehearsal of collapse and renewal. Civilization is not exempt from this rhythm. It sleeps, wakes, rebuilds, forgets, remembers. Each iteration carries echoes of the last. Each believes itself unprecedented. Deep time disagrees. To see the pattern is to step outside urgency. It is to understand that our moment is neither final nor unique. It is one turn in a long spiral shaped by land climate and human response. Before Sumer, the pattern already existed. Sumer did not invent it. It merely expressed it in durable form. What came after repeated it again and again under different names. The pattern is not destiny. It is context. What we choose within it still matters. But to choose wisely, we must first recognize where we are in the cycle. Deep time is patient. It waits for recognition. The warning does not arrive as prophecy or command. It appears quietly embedded in systems already under strain. In deep time, the Earth rarely announces change. It signals through imbalance. Rivers shift course. Seasons lengthen or compress. Animal migrations falter. Human societies notice these signs first as inconvenience, not threat. Crops fail slightly. Storms arrive off schedule. Familiar patterns hesitate. Warnings are subtle because they must be. If they were obvious, adaptation would be impossible. The planet teaches through gradual discomfort, not spectacle. What matters is not the signal itself, but whether attention is paid. Most warnings are ignored because they do not yet hurt enough. In prehistoric contexts, warnings were read through the body rather than abstract models. Hunters sensed scarcity in thinner herds. Gatherers noticed changes in flowering cycles. Fisher groups felt absence before understanding cause. These signals accumulated, slowly testing memory against expectation. When elders could no longer predict outcomes reliably, authority weakened. This erosion of trust in inherited knowledge is one of the earliest social warnings. Archaeology cannot directly record, yet its effects ripple outward. Societies built on shared understanding falter when understanding loses accuracy. The warning is not environmental alone, it is epistemic. When knowledge stops matching reality systems, destabilize long before collapse becomes visible. Archaeological layers show that warning periods often coincide with increased experimentation. Toolkits diversify, diet breadth expands, settlement patterns loosen. These are not signs of desperation but of sensing instability. Humans hedge risk by exploring alternatives. When warning signs intensify, redundancy becomes survival strategy. Multiple food sources, multiple alliances, multiple movement options. Civilization later interprets this phase as inefficiency. Deep time recognizes it as intelligence. The warning is not yet a crisis. It is a prompt to remain flexible. Those who respond early adapt quietly. Those who wait demand certainty that never arrives. Climate records reveal that major transitions are preceded by oscillation. Temperatures fluctuate rather than shift cleanly. Rainfall varies unpredictably. These liminal periods are the most stressful. Systems optimized for consistency perform poorly under variability. Early agricultural societies are especially vulnerable here. Crops expect timing. Storage expects predictability. Surplus assumes continuity. When warning signs disrupt cycles, the very innovations that once ensured security amplify risk. The warning exposes fragility disguised as strength. Stability breeds specialization. Specialization reduces resilience. The warning phase reveals this trade-off with brutal clarity. Human responses to warning are shaped by memory length. Societies with short generational memory struggle to contextualize change. Without stories of previous resets, anomalies appear unprecedented and temporary. Denial becomes rational. Archaeology suggests that many collapses were preceded by prolonged warning periods, during which societies invested further in failing systems. Irrigation expanded despite declining water reliability. Storage increased despite volatile yields. These are not foolish choices. They are expressions of commitment. Abandoning infrastructure is costly emotionally and materially. The warning tests willingness to release sunk investment before catastrophe forces it. Warnings also reshape social relations. Scarcity perception alters trust. Competition intensifies subtly. Hoarding appears before famine. Defensive architecture precedes conflict. These changes are often misread as causes rather than symptoms. The warning phase strains cooperation by introducing uncertainty into expectation. When tomorrow is unclear, generosity becomes risky. Hierarchies harden as authority attempts control. Yet these responses often worsen vulnerability. The warning does not demand dominance. It demands coordination. Misreading the signal leads societies to tighten when they should loosen. Symbolic systems record warnings indirectly. Mythologies accumulate flood stories, fire cycles, dying gods. These narratives are not fantasies. They are compressed memories of disruption translated into cultural language. When material warnings exceed comprehension, meaning absorbs excess. Ritual intensifies. Offerings increase. Calendars grow elaborate. These behaviors are attempts to restore predictability through symbolism. Archaeology finds such intensification before collapse repeatedly. The warning pushes societies toward meaning-making when material solutions fail. This is not superstition. It is cognitive adaptation to uncertainty. Warnings are unevenly distributed. Some regions experience abundance while others decline. Trade networks mask local stress temporarily by redistributing resources. This delay is dangerous. It allows central systems to ignore peripheral warning signs. Archaeological evidence shows core regions maintaining stability by drawing from stressed margins until margins fail completely. Collapse then appears sudden at the center, though warning was long visible elsewhere. The warning was present, it was simply displaced. Deep time teaches that ignoring localized signals does not eliminate risk, it concentrates it. The most difficult warnings concern time. Systems calibrated to past rhythms struggle to imagine fundamentally different futures. Early societies often interpreted anomalies as temporary deviations rather than permanent shifts. This misinterpretation is not ignorance. It is pattern recognition misfiring. Humans evolved to expect fluctuation around norms, not regime change. The warning phase exists precisely because regime change is rare but devastating. Recognizing it requires abandoning comforting assumptions. Archaeology shows few societies manage this gracefully. Those that do leave little trace because they disperse before collapse creates monuments. Warnings also appear in demographic signals. Migration increases. Peripheral populations move inward seeking security. Urban density rises just as resources strain. These movements are responses to warning, not causes of collapse. Cities swell because people sense instability elsewhere. The concentration that follows accelerates stress within the city. Infrastructure strains, sanitation falters, disease spreads. The warning phase compresses populations into increasingly fragile configurations. Collapse appears as failure of the city, but the warning originated far beyond its walls. Technological responses to warning often accelerate decline. Solutions designed for previous conditions amplify imbalance under new ones. Dams alter sediment flow, irrigation salinizes soil. Intensification reduces biodiversity. Each fix narrows options further. Archaeology documents repeated cycles of overcorrection. Humans are excellent problem solvers within known parameters. Warnings indicate parameters have shifted. Applying old solutions to new conditions worsens outcomes. The warning demands restraint. History shows we rarely listen. The warning phase is psychologically exhausting. Living with uncertainty drains collective patience. Social cohesion erodes. Not from conflict, but from fatigue. Archaeological signs include declining craftsmanship, reduced maintenance, thinner construction. These are not signs of incompetence, they are symptoms of stretched capacity. When systems operate constantly at their limits, quality declines. The warning extracts cost before collapse. It is a slow attrition of attention, care, and trust. By the time failure arrives, society is already depleted. Deep time reveals that warnings are generous. They unfold across generations. They offer multiple chances to adapt. Collapse only appears sudden because attention was elsewhere. The Earth does not ambush. It signals. Humans miss signals because they conflict with desire. Archaeology is the record of missed warnings, not stupidity, attachment. The deeper the investment, the harder the release. Civilization excels at commitment. The warning exposes the danger of that strength. In prehistoric contexts, mobility was the primary response to warning. Movement dissolved stress before it concentrated. Sedentism removes that option. Once rooted, societies must absorb shock internally. The warning phase lengthens under sedentism, increasing damage. This is why early mobile cultures appear resilient. They exited before collapse etched itself into the ground. Sedentary cultures endure warning longer, leaving clearer archaeological scars. The warning phase becomes visible only when movement is constrained. The warning also reshapes ethics, survival priorities shift, norms bend. Practices once taboo become acceptable. These changes are adaptive, not moral failures. Deep time shows that ethical systems respond to material conditions. When environments tighten, moral frameworks compress. When abundance returns, expansion follows. Archaeology captures these shifts imperfectly through burial treatment, diet change, and spatial organization. The warning phase destabilizes values because values assume continuity. Night intensifies the warning. Darkness quiets distraction. Subtle sounds emerge. Ancient humans likely processed warning most deeply during rest. Dreams encoded anxiety. Stories shifted tone. Fear sharpened perception. Modern societies drown warning in noise. Deep time had silence. That silence amplified signal. Perhaps this is why ancient societies responded more flexibly than later ones. Attention is the currency warnings demand. The warning is not an enemy. It is an invitation to realign, to simplify, to diversify, to remember older strategies encoded in bodies and landscapes. Collapse occurs when warning is mistaken for inconvenience. Deep time does not judge this error. It records it, over and over. Understanding the warning reframes collapse as consequence, not mystery. What follows is never sudden to the earth, only to those who stopped listening. The relationship between sky and earth is older than language, older than myth, older even than memory itself. Long before humans named stars or measured soil, they sensed connection. The sky governed light season and temperature. The earth governed shelter, food, and movement. Survival depended on reading both as one system rather than separate domains. This unified perception shaped human cognition deep into prehistory, long before it left architectural or written trace. Early humans did not observe the sky out of curiosity alone. They watched because the sky spoke to the ground. Shifting constellations marked animal migrations. Lunar cycles aligned with tides, fertility, and growth. Subtle changes in daylight signaled approaching cold or thaw. These patterns were not abstract knowledge. They were instructions embedded in rhythm. Sky and earth formed a dialogue, and humans learned to listen. Archaeological evidence shows that many early sites align with celestial events. This is not coincidence or worship in the later sense. It reflects practical synchronization. Aligning activity with predictable cycles reduced uncertainty. When to move, when to gather, when to wait. The sky offered long-range information unavailable on the ground. The earth offered confirmation. Together they stabilized decision-making. As climates fluctuated after the glacial period, this relationship intensified. Earth became less predictable. Weather patterns shifted, landscapes transformed. In response, attention turned upward. The sky remained stable even when terrain did not. Stars returned reliably. Seasons cycled despite environmental upheaval. The sky became an anchor when the earth became uncertain. This reliance shaped early symbolic systems. Celestial patterns entered stories not as gods but as memory aids. Narratives encoded timing and warning. A star rising early meant scarcity. A moon cycle shortened meant change. These stories persisted because they worked. They were not metaphysical, they were instructional. The earth, meanwhile, stored time differently. Soil accumulated layers. Stone eroded slowly. Water carved channels that outlasted generations. Humans learned to read these signals too. Exposed strata revealed past floods. Fossil shells inland marked former seas. The earth told stories measured in patience rather than repetition. Sky time and earth time operate on different scales. The sky repeats. The earth accumulates. Civilization emerges when humans attempt to reconcile these rhythms. Agriculture depends on repetition, but fields respond cumulatively. Irrigation follows seasonal cycles, but salinization builds invisibly. The tension between repeating sky rhythms and accumulating Earth consequences defines much of human history. Early societies managed this balance intuitively. Their scale was small enough to adjust when imbalance appeared. As settlements grew, the balance strained. Sky patterns continued unchanged, but Earth feedback intensified. Fields degraded, water tables shifted, soil tired. The sky promised continuity. The Earth demanded restraint. This divergence created cultural tension. When outcomes failed to match explanation turned upward. The sky was blamed for Earth's exhaustion. Ritual attempted repair. Offerings addressed imbalance. Yet the Earth responds only to material intervention. Deep Time records many moments where societies trusted sky repetition while ignoring Earth accumulation. Astronomy and geology diverged slowly as disciplines, but in early human perception they were inseparable. A drought was both celestial and terrestrial. A flood was both seasonal and geological. This integrated understanding allowed early adaptation. Fragmentation of that perception introduced delay. The sky also offered psychological relief. Its vastness dwarfed human struggle. In unstable environments, looking upward provided orientation beyond immediate chaos. Night skies imposed order through pattern. Constellations returned even when villages did not. This continuity supported endurance. Archaeology reveals that even when societies collapsed materially, celestial practices often persisted. Calendars survived displacement. Star knowledge travelled with people. The sky could not be destroyed. It became the most portable form of continuity humans possessed. The Earth, by contrast, demanded local knowledge. Soil differs valley to valley. Water behaves differently in each basin. When people moved, they had to relearn Earth's language. Sky knowledge eased transition. Earth knowledge rebuilt slowly. This asymmetry favoured celestial continuity over terrestrial familiarity during migration. As proto-cities emerged, sky-Earth alignment formalised. Structures oriented precisely. Calendars regulated labour. Agricultural cycles locked into celestial timing. This increased efficiency, but reduced responsiveness. When Earth conditions drifted, adherence to sky-based schedules delayed adaptation. This rigidity becomes visible archaeologically. Repeated rebuilding in failing locations, continued planting in degrading soils, infrastructure maintained past viability. The sky said continue. The Earth said stop. Societies listened to the sky longer than they should have. Deep Time shows this pattern repeatedly. When sky rhythms dominate decision-making, systems become brittle. When Earth feedback dominates, systems fragment. Balance is rare and temporary. Civilization oscillates between these poles. Modern science separates sky and Earth analytically. Ancient humans experienced them holistically. Ironically, fragmentation increased precision but reduced intuition. Data replaced sensation. Models replaced memory. The sky became abstract. The Earth became resource. The conversation broke. The archaeological record preserves moments when that dialogue briefly reconnected. Societies adjusted calendars, altered farming strategies, shifted settlement. These moments are quiet successes that leave little trace because they prevented collapse. Failure leaves monuments, balance leaves absence. Night is where sky and Earth reunite perceptually. The ground cools, stars emerge, the horizon softens, human senses widen. Deep Time was lived mostly at night without artificial interruption. Attention sharpened. Patterns emerged. Civilization introduced light that severed this union. Nights shortened artificially. Sky faded. Earth dominated experience. Awareness narrowed. Warnings arrived, muted. Deep Time teaches that attention is ecological. What we attend to survives. Understanding sky and Earth as one system reframes history. It explains why civilizations misjudge limits, why repetition seduces, why accumulation surprises. The sky promises return, the Earth records cost. Before Sumer, this relationship was intimate and flexible. After Sumer, it became institutionalized. Temples rose, calendars fixed, authority claimed interpretation. The sky was no longer observed, it was administered. Yet the Earth never accepted delegation. It continued responding only to physical reality. This mismatch underlies many collapses mistaken for moral or political failure. They were ecological misalignments between sky expectation and Earth capacity. Deep time does not privilege either domain, it observes their interaction. Humans thrive when they listen to both. They falter when one voice drowns out the other. As sleep deepens, the sky returns. Breathing slows. Awareness expands. The Earth supports quietly. In this state, the ancient dialogue becomes audible again. Civilization was born when humans tried to freeze this dialogue into structure. It survives when we remember it must remain dynamic. The return does not announce itself as arrival. It emerges as recognition. A sense that something familiar has resurfaced not because it is identical, but because it feels structurally known. In deep time, return is not repetition of form. It is recurrence of condition. Humans do not step back into the same world. They step into echoes shaped by similar pressures, similar constraints, similar opportunities. The return is the moment when patterns converge again, and ancient responses awaken beneath modern skins. Archaeology shows that returns often follow collapse, but not immediately. There is an interval of dispersal, forgetting, and quiet adaptation. Populations thin, complexity dissolves, systems simplify. During this phase, humans relearn older strategies stored deep in cultural memory. Mobility increases. Cooperation becomes intimate again. Innovation slows, but resilience rises. The return begins not when cities are rebuilt, but when stability becomes imaginable once more. In prehistoric contexts, return often meant reoccupation of abandoned landscapes. Valleys once flooded dry again, forests regenerate. Rivers stabilize into predictable channels. Humans move back cautiously, testing the land with small commitments. Camps appear where villages once stood. Hearths replace walls. This restraint is memory in action. The land is treated as familiar but untrusted. The return also occurs internally. Psychological orientation shift. After prolonged instability, humans value predictability. They invest again in routines in storage in place. These investments feel justified because the world appears to hold still long enough to reward them. Archaeological layers show gradual thickening after periods of disruption. Floors rebuilt, walls repaired, paths formalized. Paths. The return gathers momentum slowly. Importantly, the return is never complete. Knowledge lost during collapse does not fully reappear. Technologies degrade. Skills narrow. What returns is not previous complexity, but modified simplicity. This is why later civilizations differ from earlier ones even when occupying the same regions. They inherit land, not memory. They must rebuild understanding from fragments. The return often carries optimism. Survivors interpret renewed stability as confirmation of endurance. Rituals intensify. Identity consolidates. Narratives emphasize continuity and destiny. These stories help bind communities during rebuilding. Archaeology captures this through symbolic uniformity. Shared styles re-emerge. Burial practices standardize. The return needs cohesion to proceed. Yet beneath optimism lies vulnerability. The conditions enabling return are temporary. Climate stabilizes only briefly. Resources recover unevenly. Population growth accelerates faster than ecological capacity. The same pressures that once caused collapse begin accumulating again. The return plants the seeds of future strain. This cyclical tension defines human history. Return is both recovery and reset. It restores possibility while reintroducing risk. The difference lies in memory. Societies that retain awareness of previous collapse respond more cautiously. Those that mythologize survival overlearn success and underprepare for failure. The return also reshapes inequality. During dispersal, hierarchy flattens. Survival demands cooperation. As stability returns, differentiation resumes. Some families accumulate surplus faster. Advantage compounds. Spatial patterns re-emerge. Central locations gain value. Peripheral zones lag. Archaeology records this through house-size burial goods and access to resources. The return is visible in infrastructure. Irrigation channels are cleared, storage rebuilt, paths widened. Each improvement increases efficiency while reducing flexibility. Commitment deepens, exit options narrow. The return trades resilience for productivity. This trade feels rational in stable conditions. It becomes dangerous when conditions shift again. The return also transforms relationships with land. During instability, land is partner. During return, land becomes asset. Ownership concepts sharpen. Boundaries harden. Access is regulated. These changes are subtle at first. Archaeology detects them through enclosure patterns and spatial segregation. The return introduces control where earlier phases required negotiation. Symbolically, the return elevates ancestry. Lineage becomes anchor. Claims to land root themselves in memory of occupation. Burial beneath floors resumes. The dead legitimize the living. This practice binds identity to place and discourages movement. The return stabilizes through attachment. The sky plays a role here as well. Celestial cycles reassure. Calendars formalize. Time becomes scheduled again. Ritual aligns labor. This coordination enhances productivity but enforces rigidity. When return succeeds, societies trust patterns more than signals. They expect continuity because continuity has returned before. The return also renews long-distance connections. Trade routes re-establish. Networks reform. Exchange accelerates. These connections buffer local variability but create interdependence. A failure in one region ripples outward. The return scales risk along with benefit. Deep time shows that returns are often mistaken for endings. Societies believe they have reached stability permanently. Myths of origin and destiny emerge strongest during return phases. Archaeology captures this confidence through monumentality. Building asserts presence. Permanence is declared materially. Yet monuments are signs of belief, not guarantee. The return is not a final state. It is a phase. Deep time treats it gently but honestly. Every return carries expiration. Modern societies experience return psychologically. After crisis, routines resume. Economies rebuild. Growth returns. Confidence follows. This familiarity masks structural vulnerability. Ancient patterns repeat at larger scale. Deep time recognizes this as normal, not tragic. The return also brings forgetting. Trauma fades. Lessons soften. Efficiency replaces caution. Memory yields to convenience. Archaeological sequences show reduced diversity of strategy after return. Societies streamline. Streamlining works until it does not. What distinguishes survivable returns from catastrophic ones is diversity. Systems that preserve multiple ways of living adapt longer. Those that commit fully to one mode collapse faster. Deep time rewards pluralism quietly. The return is therefore not triumph. It is opportunity with conditions. It offers a window where choices matter disproportionately. How societies rebuild determines how they fail next. Night deepens during return, fires burn steadily, sounds return. Children are born into relative calm. They grow assuming continuity. Their bodies do not remember collapse. Their minds inherit only stories shaped by survival bias. This generational shift is critical. The return feels safest to those who did not live through disruption. They invest hardest. They commit fully. Archaeology sees this through intensified construction in second or third generations after collapse. Deep time remains indifferent. It allows return, then adjusts again. Climate drifts, resources strain, population grows, the cycle tightens. The return teaches humility if observed carefully. It shows that resilience lies not in permanence but in readiness to move again. Societies that remember how to leave endure longer. Before Sumer returns happened repeatedly without cities. After Sumer returns built cities that magnified consequence. The pattern remained. Only scale changed. The return is where humans believe history resumes. Deep time knows it never stopped. Reflection is not analysis. It is what happens when explanation loosens its grip and understanding settles into something quieter. In deep time, reflection is the final movement, not because questions end, but because urgency dissolves. After patterns are seen, warnings heard, returns recognized, what remains is acceptance. The human story does not resolve into clarity, it resolves into awareness. Reflection is where we stop trying to master time and allow ourselves to inhabit it. Looking back across the long arc before Sumer civilization no longer appears as an origin point. It appears as a pause in motion, a moment when humans chose to stay still long enough for memory to harden into structure. This choice was neither wrong nor inevitable, it was conditional. Reflection strips it of drama and restores proportion. Civilization is one expression among many, not the culmination of human becoming. Deep time reveals that intelligence preceded permanence by tens of thousands of years. Humans learned cooperation, symbolism, planning, and adaptation while moving lightly across unstable worlds. These capacities were not invented by cities concentrated them. Reflection reminds us that what feels essential now once existed without walls writing or hierarchy. Nothing fundamental was missing, only scale was different. This realization softens the weight civilization places on itself. If humanity flourished without permanence, then permanence is not proof of success. It is preference. Reflection allows this truth without accusation. Civilizations are not failures because they collapse. They are experiments bounded by conditions. When conditions shift, experiments conclude. Deep time records outcomes, not intentions. Reflection also reframes loss. Much of what vanished before Sumer did not vanish through catastrophe. It faded because it was not designed to last. Knowledge stored in bodies dissolves when bodies do. Stories tied to landscapes disappear when landscapes drown. This is not tragedy. It is the cost of impermanence chosen for flexibility. Reflection honors what endured without demanding evidence. The archaeological record, when viewed reflectively, becomes less a ledger of progress and more a texture of presence. Layers of soil ash and stone mark moments of attention, effort, and care. Each layer represents people solving immediate problems with available tools. Reflection removes judgment from these acts. Survival is not lesser than legacy. In reflection, the idea of a single beginning dissolves. Civilization did not begin once. It began repeatedly in different forms at different scales under different skies. Sumer was one crystallization among many possibilities. Others left no cities, no writing, no names. They are no less human for that absence. Reflection restores dignity to the unwritten. The quiet power of reflection lies in restraint. It resists the urge to extract lessons as commands. Deep time does not instruct. It contextualizes. Patterns recur, but outcomes vary. Reflection does not predict the future. It widens perception, so futures are not mistaken for destiny. One of the most difficult truths revealed by reflection is that collapse is not abnormal. It is a normal response to misalignment. When systems grow beyond their adaptive capacity, they reorganize. Humans often experience this as failure because identity binds to structure. Deep time experiences it as transition. Reflection allows both perspectives without conflict. Reflection also tempers nostalgia. The pre-civilized past was not idyllic. It was demanding, precarious, and often short. But it was also adaptive, flexible, and socially rich. Civilization traded some of that flexibility for security and scale. Neither state is superior. Each carries cost. Reflection dissolves comparison. The end of this long journey does not leave us with answers, but with posture. A way of standing in time. Instead of asking how old civilization is, reflection asks how fragile it has always been, and how resilient humanity has proven beneath it. Civilization is young, humanity is ancient. In the quiet of night, this understanding feels less heavy. The body relaxes into rhythms older than institutions. Breath aligns with cycles that do not require explanation. Reflection becomes embodied. Knowing gives way to being. Reflection also reveals continuity across distance. The people who lived before Sumer are not ancestors in a linear sense. They are parallel expressions of humanity under different constraints. Their decisions echo not because of lineage, but because similar pressures produce similar responses. Reflection dissolves the illusion of separation. When reflection deepens, urgency fades. The future no longer feels like a test passed. It becomes another layer to be lived. Deep time does not rush. It accumulates. Reflection aligns the mind with that pace. Civilization seen through reflection becomes less a monument and more a moment. A long moment perhaps, but still bounded. Its structures will erode, its records will thin. Something else will follow. This is not loss, it is sequence. Reflection does not demand detachment, it invites humility. To know that our time will also be interpreted through fragments. That future archaeologies will misread us, that meaning will thin and distort, and yet life will have been lived fully within those misreadings. The calm that follows reflection is not resignation, it is equilibrium, a recognition that humanity has always existed between movement and settlement memory, and forgetting stability and change. There is no final balance, only oscillation. Before Sumer humans learned how to live without permanence, after Sumer humans learned how to live with it, reflection suggests that the future may require remembering both. As sleep approaches, the long story quiets. Not because it ends, but because attention softens. The earth continues its slow adjustments. The sky continues its cycles. Humanity continues its negotiation between them. Reflection is the last movement not because it concludes the story, but because it returns us gently to ourselves, aware, unhurried, and at peace within time. Time does not end where our story pauses, it merely slows enough for breath to be heard. Beneath every city, beneath every road and screen-lit room, there is a quieter architecture still working the patient geometry of stone settling under gravity. What we call the present is only the thinnest surface layer, a skin stretched across immensities of pressure and memory. When you listen closely, you can feel that depth holding you, not demanding anything, only reminding you that you belong to a rhythm older than intention. Civilization often flatters itself as an achievement, yet in geological terms it is an experiment written in chalk on a shoreline. Seas advance, retreat, and advance again, erasing without malice. Rivers migrate sideways across valleys, abandoning channels that once fed entire worlds. Ice returns when heat lingers too long, and heat returns when ice grows heavy enough to fracture itself. None of this is punishment. It is regulation, the planet breathing in the systems rather than emotions. What survives these long breaths is rarely what shines brightest. It is what bends. Stone that fractures along natural planes lasts longer than stone forced into defiance. Cultures that store flexibility alongside knowledge endure longer than those that mistake permanence for strength. This is the quiet lesson buried in ash layers and flood silts repeated across continents and epochs. Adaptation is not surrender. It is conversation with change. When we speak of origins, we often search for a single doorway, a first city, a first word, a first field planted with intent. But deep time does not use doors. It uses gradients. Hunting becomes gathering, gathering becomes tending, tending becomes staying, and staying slowly teaches humans to build memory outside the body. No moment announces itself as the beginning. The beginning is always recognized later when continuity becomes visible in hindsight. Even now your body carries these older negotiations. Your bones thicken where stress repeats. Your circadian rhythm listens to light more faithfully than clocks. Your nervous system calms near water and fire because it learned long ago that these meant survival. None of this is metaphor. It is inheritance written in tissue shaped by climates your name will never know. The past is not behind you. It is underneath your thoughts. To understand civilization before Sumer is not to search for lost empires or forbidden machines. It is to accept that intelligence existed long before complexity could accumulate. Minds were already modern while environments were still unstable. The delay was not ignorance, it was constraint. Calories, predictability and time had not yet aligned. When they did, structure followed naturally like crystals forming once a solution cools enough to allow order. This perspective softens urgency. If civilization emerged from patience, it can be sustained by patience. Growth is not destiny. Neither is collapse. Systems oscillate. They overshoot, correct, and overshoot again. The danger lies not in change itself, but in forgetting that change is normal. When societies imagine themselves exempt from cycles, they build too rigidly and listen too late. So this story does not end with a warning carved in stone. It ends with an invitation to notice scale. Your life is brief, but it is not small. It participates in processes that began before language and will continue after names fade. To live well within that truth is not to withdraw from the world, but to move through it more gently aware that every step presses into layers of time that remember you, even when you are gone. Sleep arrives when the mind accepts that it does not need to solve the whole past tonight. It only needs to rest beside it. Let the glaciers remain where they were, let the fires dim, let the stones keep their slow counsel. Tomorrow will ask for attention again, and history will still be here, patient, incomplete, and generous with silence. For now, allow darkness to act like sediment, settling questions gently to the bottom, where they can wait without urgency, without fear, and without names. Breathing slows, clocks loosen, and the long night opens a small, safe space where curiosity can sleep, while time keeps watch over us all without judgment or demand in the deep quiet. We've reached the edge of tonight's journey, traveller. The long path through dust, stone, ice and memory no longer asks for your attention. Everything that needed to be carried has already been carried this far. The rest can be set down gently like a tool placed back into the soil after the work is done. Nothing more is required of you now. You do not need to remember the details of what unfolded across this vast passage of time. The layers of evidence, the quiet gaps, the slow turns of climate and culture have already settled where they belong. They have slipped beneath conscious thought, absorbed the way landscapes absorb rain. What matters has found its way into you without effort, without force, without demand. In the end, traveller, it is all right to not understand. Understanding was never the destination. Presence was. Curiosity walked beside you, but it does not need to follow you into rest. Let gravity hold you. Let the questions fade. The body knows how to release what the mind no longer needs to carry. As the weight of the night gathers, allow the world to continue without your supervision. Civilizations rise and erode, stars burn, and cool stones remember and forget. You are safe to sleep inside this large emotion, held by systems older than worry and gentler than control. Nothing is being lost by resting. Everything continues. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only observed. Tonight the universe whispers again. Sleep, traveller. The cosmos will keep watch.